Well, at 8:38 a.m. this morning, we continue with our broadcast on News and Views right here on Solar Media on this Friday morning. And we are shifting focus from Israel and going across to looking at the African continent. And we're talking about the Sahel region. We're talking about Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. And this is where the question that is being asked is he the people's captain or is it a digital creation? Because we've seen just so much on social media on Ibrahim Traore, and many people actually painting him as the savior and earning the respect of the African continent and particularly the people in Africa. And this is the reason why we are talking with journalist and researcher at the Review Network, Mariam Jooma. Mariam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hopefully, I got your surname right this Friday compared to last week.
Walaikum salam, Uncle Inayat. That's perfect.
Jazakallah khairan so much for that. Mariam, this is quite interesting when we're talking about Ibrahim Traore and also looking at this man. From what we see on social media, it's been quite a revelation. And we just see so much on Ibrahim Traore on social media being circulated lately. But also, we are living in a digital age, and we know AI very, very prominent, very, very dominant as well in terms of generating a lot of material for social media, for the consumption of people who follow social media. So let's just talk about, Ibrahim Traore and the question that has been asked: the people's captain or a digital creation?
Thank you, Uncle Inayat. Definitely a very important topic. Essentially, what we need to do before we start the discussion is to understand that there are two things happening. The first one is looking at the political formation that has, the change in Burkina Faso. So it is a military junta that have taken over. We're not talking about a democratic leader that has come in through, a voting process. However, we put that aside and we look at the media narrative. And why can we do that? Is because the Western media has generally ignored democratic credentials for authoritarian regimes that are supportive of their aims. So if we look at his predecessor, Blaise Compaoré, he was actually, unequivocally supported by the French establishment. We never heard a whimper from the French about his jailing of opposition members, of the restriction of freedom of speech, of anything like that. However, now that we have Ibrahim Traoré, who, yes, is a military leader, we acknowledge that. But on the other hand, his discourse is very much anti imperial, anti colonial, and it's very much rooted in the sovereignty of the Burkina Faso people. And so this is firstly something very important to acknowledge, that we're not necessarily, fully supporting or blindly supporting a leader who happens to just be anti-Western. What we are saying is keep an eye on the democratic movements, keep an eye on what's happening post, the honeymoon euphoria period. But at the same time, let's not forget the historical context of how, human rights abuses were blatantly ignored by the West, who simply now seem to be making a fuss about media coverage of Ibrahim Traoré. So it's very important for us to put that out on the table, firstly. If I may go on to the second point, what we're seeing now is what I would like to call branding versus propaganda. So when a Western leader comes up with some kind of a new or innovative way of presenting himself or herself, as we've seen, for example, in Barack Obama, Clinton, from the Clinton years, actually, the idea of media and its manipulation or its usage of media in capturing audiences and capturing the political space, has been entrenched. So if you look at that, you look at Obama, look at Clinton, you can even say, going back to Ronald Reagan as an American actor himself, that those were seen as branding opportunities. Whereas when you have someone from the global south who comes in with an anti imperial or a nationalist rhetoric, you then see the words being used like, propaganda, manipulation, cult. So, in our discussion today, I think we're referring to the Africa Report article that essentially says or questions, is Ibrahim Traoré a digital cult, which refers to, as you've suggested, the amount of social media coverage he's been receiving. And now let's look at the word cult. Cult is blatantly a negative word. It assumes a leader who has blind followers, who've been brainwashed, who believe in things that are not necessarily possible. And all these associations with the word cult already tells you that there's a dismissiveness around Ibrahim Traoré and his leadership. So we can unpack that further.
Yes, I think, Mariam, what is important is to unpack fact from fiction. And the point I had raised was AI generated material for consumption on social media. And I think it's important for us to actually understand this because the article that was presented to me obviously speaks of a number of fictional material and questionable material that is circulating on social media. So let's just try and understand some of that, Mariam.
Certainly, Uncle Inayat, very important, particularly in the space that you and I work in. It becomes increasingly difficult to, differentiate between what is fact and what is fiction. With software improving at a rapid speed, where you actually are incapable of discerning whether it's the real person speaking or not. Putting that aside, if we suggest that yes, there are, fake accounts being used to promote Ibrahim Traoré, okay, that's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. We need to be critical and to raise this appropriately within the media space. However, the way that becomes critiqued is very important because we had exactly the same or a very similar understanding of social media usage with the American elections. You've had that in the UK. You've had that with, so many issues like Brexit, all of that about how the algorithms have been, manipulated in order to present a certain outcome. So as I've said before, we are not sitting here saying Ibrahim Traoré is amazing and he's the best thing since sliced bread. What we're saying is he's offering a different discourse, which will later have to be weighed up against his actions. But for now, we're looking at the discourse and why is the discourse unpalatable? And importantly, Uncle Inayat, we must look at how what came before. So the Operation Barkhane, which was a military operation by the French from 2014 until 2022, so almost a decade of military intervention in the Sahel for what they said was, combating terrorism. What actually happened in the wake of those 8 years was increased insecurity, youth disaffection, economic decline, and basically a boxing in of the Sahel region into the CFA, the franc system, where they could not. One of the conditions was they could not leave the economic system, not having sovereignty over their own political space. So if this article is going to be fair and say Ibrahim Traoré, doesn't necessarily have the sway that social media suggests, then let us also speak about why he might be popular in an imaginary way. Why would people want to push that? It obviously suggests that people want to believe that there is a leader who can oppose the West. And that is because what came before him needs to be understood well. And so this article fails in contextualizing the imagined, if we do say that, the imagined popularity of Ibrahim Traore.
Yes, but I think once again, when we talk about his popularity in an imaginary way, uh, social media to a large extent, and once again, creating this character, whether it's fact, whether it's fiction. At the end of the day, one will never know because it is still impacting on people. It is influencing people. It is. We find that people are actually looking at Ibrahim Traoré as some sort of a savior, as a messiah, which I think you alluded to as well. In the context of what we are actually discussing, but also I think more importantly is how important is it for us, Mariam, to actually get to the truth, and the truth is. Going to Burkina Faso, or talking to people within Burkina Faso, talking to journalists, talking to people that really matter to try and separate what is fact from the fiction.
Absolutely. And I would suggest that any good researcher, any researcher worth their salt, would actually do a field trip to Burkina Faso and engage not only with the government, but with opposition voices. We've seen, look, in Niger, in neighboring Niger, that there is a closing of the political space, that opposition parties have been banned. So, as I suggest, it's not a matter of us being uncritical. What uh, I'm suggesting as a media practitioner is for us to be able to report appropriately using the understanding of the context. So what we're saying is African journalists must focus on the story. At the same time, Western journalists need to uphold the same critiques that they have for the global South, for their own leaders. So where are we seeing, the outcry around Netanyahu and his crackdown on opposition, compared to Ibrahim Traoré, who's, just kind of recently on the scene and hasn't had a chance to actually prove himself. So it's very important, I think, which is a point that we've made several times before on Salam Media also, is to have critical thinkers and to have our journalists schooled not only in what is current but in the historical narrative of a particular topic, which would allow their reporting to be far more nuanced, and offer the audience a greater understanding of what is at stake.
Well, certainly, Miriam, and also I think and what you mentioned is extremely important and critical for media practitioners like ourselves is to look at what is playing out through a very, very different lens, particularly at a time when one can be influenced so easily through social media and through this digital revolution that we are going through at this point in time. And sometimes criticism is leveled against people like ourselves as well that could easily fall prey to what we see playing out.
Certainly, Uncle Inayat, I failed to mention, that the article in which this appeared, Africa Report, is actually owned by Jeune Afrique. And Jeune Afrique Media is based in Paris, is very closely aligned with the French government, and has unquestionably supported the authoritarian regimes of West Africa because they align with the French administration's aims and economic goals. So as we speak about the rise of AI, which is definitely something to be very wary of in terms of fact and fiction, we must also look at where this media is being produced. So as I said, Africa Report is wholly owned by a French company. What does that mean? Would it be reasonable to suggest that what is coming out of a French owned regime aligned media would actually present the truth of what's happening in Burkina Faso? So, this is where, Salam Media, as one example of amazing community grassroots journalism, this is what we need to promote. We need to promote citizens, active media practitioners who are non-aligned, if I may say that, whose the bottom line is not as important as understanding the truth.
Well, shukran for that, Mariam, and always pleasure talking to you. And I think, what is important. And just as a closing thought, it's all about controlling the narrative, whether it's coming through from mainstream media, whether it's coming through from corporate media, social media, AI generated media, all forms of media. It's all about controlling the narrative. And I think, this is something that we need to obviously explore in a lot more detail. And hopefully, we can have in a discussion with media practitioners like yourself and many other media practitioners into where we are, especially in this day and age as a media, and where to from here.
Thank you, Uncle Inayat. Certainly, that's something we must focus on.
Jazakallah khairan so much for that. Have yourself a wonderful Jummah as well, Mariam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Mariam Jummah Çarıkçı with us this morning, and with it, we're going to go for a break. Next up, Jummah Inspirations with Maulana Abdul Baqi.